Hello and welcome to another edition of the Sumer Sports Show. Not with Eric Eager and Thomas Dimitrov, but again with me, Parker Fleming, and my friend and colleague Tage Seth here, hosting the show in advance of draft week, kind of filling in as people are running around the hallway. And excuse me, I let the audio come back on the there. Rookie move on the podcast. We're here in advance of the draft as we are running around, making some final changes and some interesting stuff on our client-facing stuff for the draft, and some really, really cool stuff for all of you to see about the draft and how to think about the draft analytically and how teams and execs approach the draft, which I think will be really, really fun for you to check out on that live show on Thursday. But in the meantime, Tage and I here on the podcast, we've got some interesting guests. We've got some interesting topics. Should be a good show today. Tage, how are you doing?
Pretty good. Yeah, the news breaking of the Aaron Rodgers trade right when we were about to start here was pretty big. And I even told you it wasn't going to happen until draft day, so that was like an immediate old takes exposed for me. But we move on. I think the trade's really interesting. The Jets get a huge upgrade at quarterback going from Zach Wilson to Aaron Rodgers, but they did give up a lot of compensation, and I know we'll talk about it later and get like into the nitty gritty of the exact compensation. But I do think we should welcome our guest that's joining us today. Benjamin Robinson from Grinding the Mocks does really cool work every single year related to the draft. And so before we get to the Aaron Rodgers stuff, we wanted to bring Ben on and talk about his process and what he's seeing this year in the data, where he takes all these mock drafts and aggregates them together. So we can bring Ben up here to talk to him about this.
Hey guys.
Hey Ben, how's it going?
It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining us, man. You are proprietor and I assume the one-man shop behind Grinding the Mocks. Before we get into a little subject matter for people who may not be familiar with your work, can you give us just 30,000 foot view of what Grinding the Mocks is, how you got started in this, and kind of where it is today?
Sure. So Grinding the Mocks is a predictive mock draft analytics company based here in beautiful Washington, D.C. So we kind of do what Nate Silver does for politics, we do for mock drafts. So we use mock drafts, the wisdom of crowds, and data science to try to predict the NFL draft. Started off as kind of a fun, thought experiment with a friend of mine from college, watching the 2018 NFL draft, just kind of thinking about how you might quantify where a player would be expected to go in the draft. And then, it's gone kind of a lot of different ways from there. I've written some research about it, presented it at some pretty cool conferences. But yeah, the coolest part is being able to kind of interact with people online. And I have a lot of people who have done a lot for me in terms of giving me visibility. And one of those is the co-host of the show, Eric Eager. I'm so very grateful to Eric, among a lot of others, for kind of helping me to where I am today, where I'm working with, teams and agents and other outside kind of sports and football groups. So I'm really happy to be here to talk with you guys.
Yeah, no, thanks for joining us. We're really excited for you to be here. And you mentioned wisdom of the crowds when you were introducing Grinding the Mocks there. Why do you think that's so important to have during the NFL draft season?
I think the reason it's so important is because, any one individual, in terms of like the average person interested in the draft, there's just so much information out there. And so to me, it kind of helps to sort of sift through what's worth thinking about and what's not worth thinking about. And so I think it really helps distill information from kind of the glut of opinions and takes and predictions that are out there. And so what the wisdom of the crowds benefits from is from the different thought processes that people bring to bear on the topic. In this case, it's the draft. And so, for example, folks like us might take a look at the draft from an analytical perspective, and that has a lot of value. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I didn't believe that, and I think you guys probably agree. But there's also a lot of value in, grinding the tape. And so being able to evaluate prospects, there's some people who are really, really good at it, even if they don't even work in football. But to me, yeah, we get the benefit of a lot of different perspectives. The wisdom of crowds isn't a perfect mechanism if people are kind of following the leader, which can happen. And so it's a kind of a mix of a measure of, sentiment about players, but also that's kind of signals kind of what we think will happen in the draft before the draft happens. So it does have value. It's not perfect, but it's highly correlated with what happens actually in the draft.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting of like all the research that like Timo Riske has done at PFF, or you have done on yourself, on looking at how grinding the mocks actually predicts the draft, and how well it usually predicts it. And between that and Arif Hassan's consensus board, I think like we do see this wisdom of the crowds approach a lot. And something that has come out of that is steals in the NFL draft get tossed around a lot as a term, but we don't actually see these steals usually pan out and overperform the value that they're drafted as. But what we do see is that reaches, and when a player or when a team takes a player much higher than they were expected to go, whether it was on your website or whether it was a Reef's consensus board, those players actually do become reaches, and they actually do become, they're more likely to become where they were mocked to than when they were actually drafted. And I think it goes back to that idea where it only takes one team to reach on a player, but when a steal happens, multiple teams have to all collectively agree to pass on a player, and usually that's because of medicals or personality stuff that we don't know. So how do you feel like your website and your algorithm kind of handles that type of stuff when the draft actually happens?
Yeah, I one of the things that I think would make grinding the mocks even more accurate is if I knew which players had medical issues and knew which players were head cases, because oftentimes that information just isn't public. I think one of the worst examples in my data was Jawan Taylor, who just signed a big contract this offseason with the Chiefs, who was supposed to go in the top 5 and then had some sort of knee issue and ended up going in the top 5 of the second round. And then, when that happens, everyone's like, oh yeah, he's falling because of a medical issue. And I'm like, well, yeah, would have been cool to know. I mean, in terms of my data, just being selfish. But yeah, the idea that you bring up is, I think, really sound, that it really only takes one team to kind of move up and put their flag on a player. And if you do that before everyone else, it often signals that you might be a little out of step in terms of what the market thinks. And, I think teams would be wise, and this isn't just a selfish thing, to at least consider what a player's value is when they're taking him. And so one among many factors. And so teams do this exercise in-house mostly as a kind of mechanism to determine player availability. Like, do we need to trade up for a guy, or can we trade down? Teams are often very monolithic in their approach. They tend to target individual players in individual rounds. I think if you set up your board and your process to the point where you have, on this day, you're going to be picking from like this group of players, and they're valued, it just does not align with like that type of draft slot, trading down isn't always an option. And so I remember talking with someone from a team once. I said, yeah, no, this guy, I think you overdrafted him by like a couple rounds. He's like, well, the only other guy that was on our board, like, we really didn't like him. This guy was like high and above the best on our board. And so teams just tend to really, really focus in on, hey, in this round, we think this group of guys or this position is what we want to target. And so some of them, times they just set themselves up for this type of stuff for not being flexible with their boards that they do have. That it's important to think about kind of just what the NFL writ large might think, or the NFL public community might think about a player before selecting him. And so, yeah, I think that's oftentimes where you see these reaches happening. But in the steals, it's kind of disappointing as a fan, because you think, oh yeah, like we got this guy. And then you don't really think like, well, there's a reason you got this guy. You may not know it, but like there's a reason that you got this guy, where you got him. And so, steals are, they do happen sometimes, but it's kind of rare.
It calls to mind kind of the old economic adage about if you walk along the street and see a lot of people walking past a piece of paper, that piece of paper that's laying on the street is probably not a $50 bill if everybody's walking past it there. So, and it's kind of interesting. I think about, the Patriots, for instance, have historically been a team that has been known to zig or zag in early rounds and to kind of take some unexpected. I'm interested in how teams potentially conduct those exercises, because if I think a guy's a first round grade, great. That doesn't mean I should draft him in the first round. If everyone else thinks he's a third round, why don't I draft someone else in the first round and I can still get him there in the second? So there's these kind of tiers of uncertainty that I really do think your approach of aggregating kind of all these different approaches gives us a better range of outcomes and a better plausibility of how different people might approach it. So very, very, very interesting stuff there. Let's get into the nitty gritty a little bit, Ben, if we can, here about the draft board. I think we know what's going to happen first. Then again, life is uncertain. Maybe we don't. Currently at DraftKings, Bryce Young is minus 2,000 for the first overall pick. So let's put that aside. Things get a little hairy with the Texans. We've heard rumors about maybe they don't like the quarterbacks. Maybe they're going to go a different position. Currently, we've got Will Levis minus 135, Tyree Wilson, the defensive end, at 230, Will Anderson at plus 350, and CJ Stroud at plus 350 to be the second pick there. Ben, what have you seen about that second pick, the movement around it, and where the markets and the mock drafts kind of sit right now?
So the mock drafts are not as high on Will Levis at 2. The mock drafts are not as high as the markets on Will Levis for number 2. I kind of agree with that. I think it kind of came out of left field that, just because the 49ers have moved, some of their staff have moved on to Houston, that they're just automatically gonna pull the Shanahan card and just say, I'm going to draft the guy who can kind of, video game my offense for me. The number 2 player in grinding the mocks right now is Will Anderson, but he has an expected draft position of 3, which would tell you a little bit that the number 2 spot is not quite as solid as you think. That's followed by CJ Stroud, who has an expected draft position of 3.8, so like almost 4. And then after that, you have, Tyree Wilson. So Tyree Wilson is one of the highest rising players in my data accounting for draft position. I think there is some buzz that he might be the second pick. I think it makes some sense. Last year, the Texans surprised a lot of people by drafting Derek Stingley, the cornerback from LSU, instead of the favorite, which was Ahmad Sauce Gardner, who early returns make that move look pretty bad because Gardner seems like he might be the best player in the class basically from last year. So early returns, but still early returns look really good for the Jets. And they also drafted Kenyon Green ahead of schedule last year, the guard from Texas A&M. So it wouldn't totally surprise me if they kind of behaved that way, because they behaved that way at the top of the draft last year. Tyree Wilson and Will Anderson seem like the picks if it's not going to be a quarterback. And I think if it's going to be a quarterback, it's probably going to be CJ Stroud.
I do think going into last year, to look at where people were thinking the Texans were going to go and where they ended up going is like something that should be talked about right now, with so many people thinking that they're going to go, defensive end, whether it's Tyree Wilson or Will Anderson, after months of any quarterback that wasn't taken number 1 was getting mocked to them number 2. So it's like kind of this big shift happening on draft week, and like whether it's a smokescreen or they want us to think it's a smokescreen, like we don't know yet exactly. But where do you have the quarterbacks kind of going right now, whether it's the order of the top 4 or 5 quarterbacks, including Hendon Hooker, or just the quarterbacks in like specific destinations?
So grinding the mocks isn't great at telling you specific destinations, because sometimes, for example, I'll give like that Mac Jones example from the 2021 draft, where there's a ton of buzz for him at the 3rd pick, but he wasn't ranked as the third player, just because there was a range of outcomes that kind of said that he probably is closer to 3, but he could go later. And so you wind up with this weird thing where he's like my 4th or 5th ranked player or something like that. So it isn't always going to tell you exactly what the order is going to be. It's going to be pretty closely aligned with that, because my goal of kind of my comparison is sort of like a draft, or not a draft, but a golf analogy. Like, we try to get close to the hole. We're not always trying to get in the hole. And so the ordering of the quarterbacks right now is Young at number 1, Stroud, followed by Richardson, and then Levis. But in my update that I posted this morning, Young is holding steady at 1, which is not a surprise now. Hendon Hooker is rising as he was before. He's right inside my top 31, so my first round players. I'm not a fan of that, because I don't necessarily think it's going to happen. But then, you see Stroud falling, you see Richardson falling, and you see Levis falling right now. So I think it represents a lot of kind of consternation about what to make. There's not enough a juice from like the top creme de la creme of the mock draft community yet that says, hey, this is what the number 2 pick is going to be. I think the markets are probably a bit too high on Levis. I would fade that. I'd also fade Hendon Hooker first round if I was better. But yeah, to me, there's a lot of consternation. I still think the order, winds up being kind of what it was at the end of the college season, which was Young, Stroud, Levis, and Richardson.
Interesting. And we know that quarterback's kind of the nth quarterback always tends to fall in the draft. It feels like the last couple of years, and the public does get a little excited about about quarterbacks, about mocking them to teams. And then again, I think that it's easier to evaluate quarterbacks maybe for the median draft analyst than it is to conduct a nuanced analysis of other positions where it might take a little bit more work. So that certainly makes sense kind of behaviorally. Looking at this class overall, I think there are a couple really, really deep positions, and there's a couple thinner positions. I want to start, Ben, and just ask you about where you think this class is deep, again, from the prerogative of people getting mocked or players getting mocked, a lot of guys from the same position kind of up top. What are the deep positions in this draft where there may be a lot more value kind of later down the board just because there are so many top players at that position?
So the value in this draft really, to me, the best value is on defense, both along the lines and in the secondary. So yeah, to me, that's if you think about the positions right now in terms of the first round, I think people are kind of mocking right now like maybe 4 or even sometimes 5 wide receivers in the first round. I think the number goes under that I think maybe there's more likely to be 3 wide receivers that go in the first round. Jackson Smith and Jigba from Ohio State, Jordan Addison from USC, and Zay Flowers from Boston College. Unfortunately for your Horned Frogs, Quentin Johnston, Parker. And so to me, and I think that's going to be filled in a number of places. So I think that there'll be 1 running back, not 2 running backs. I think there'll be 3 wide receivers, not 5. I think there'll be 4 quarterbacks, not 5. And so what's going to fill in those gaps? I think it's going to be linemen, and I think it's going to be defensive back. Those are the deepest and strongest positions in the kind of first 2 days of the draft. So to me, that's where I think we're going to see a lot of the value, and that's kind of what I see happening in the first round. It's not a heavy position on the skill side outside of tight end, and the other position that I think people are kind of talking up as, hey, tight end could be a position that's abnormally deep this year. I think that's also the case. I just think that maybe it also amounts to be like, there's only 1 tight end on the field, usually, maybe 2, but there's always going to be like, you need a lot of linemen, you need a lot of cornerbacks. So I think relative to position like scarcity, then tight end is also a very kind of high quality piece of this draft. And I expect there to be 2 or maybe even 3 potentially tight ends that go in the first round. So you got like Michael Mayer from Notre Dame, you have Dalton Kincaid from Utah, and you have Darnell Washington from Georgia, who I think all have really good chances of being first round players. But there's also a bunch of really high quality guys that'll go in the second and the third rounds as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely could see that. I think this is the most tight end class has ever been talked about that I can remember during draft season, because there's just so many tight ends, especially like ones that did really well at the combine, and we see that athleticism translates at tight end better than most positions in the league, which is interesting. So I do want to talk about the defensive tackle class. I think this class, like in your data and in the consensus big board, doesn't show up as highly outside of Jalen Carter. So where do you kind of see Jalen Carter going because of what had happened off field with him, leading up to the draft, as well as the rest of the defensive tackle class with it being not as strong as usual years?
Yeah, so to me, the skill that's really important we've seen this in the market is the pass rush skill, and so Carter has that. The other guy that really has that is my own alma mater, University of Pittsburgh defensive tackle Kalijah Cansey. He has that pass rush trait that teams are interested in. He also tested incredibly well at the combine and at his pro day. You also have guys like Adetomiwa Adebawore, who can play inside and outside, who I don't think will go in the first round. You have kind of mainstays of this draft, like Brian Brisset from Clemson, who has been kind of talked about as being a first rounder, who I don't necessarily think will be this whole draft class process as well. But yeah, to me, the defensive tackle class starts with Carter. I thought that after the combine that he could fall quite a bit, but I still thought that his talent was going to be too big. And then when he pled out and it was a misdemeanor, I think teams will kind of take that and talk about how they have a good locker room. And so, to me, the team that I'm focusing on right now in terms of the first team that I would think would take a really hard look at Jalen Carter is the Detroit Lions. And so in my mock draft for Football Outsiders, that'll come out this week, that's where I think he goes. I think the same thing kind of applies to Jalen Carter that applies to Bijan Robinson. Bijan Robinson, and it's not a negative thing about him, it's just the valuation of running back. I think he still goes in the top 10 on talent. And I think Carter as well will go in the top 10 on talent, but I think there's a decent chance he goes in the top 5, but at 5, not as much earlier than that.
Yeah, I do see Carter to the Lions kind of happening. It's, there's still so much uncertainty, but Brad Holmes had this really interesting comment about him at one of his press conferences where he said he came in and he did a nice job. Again, it's always case by case. Came in, we enjoyed our time with him, did a nice job. I will say even after he's left, I felt better about him. So I do think that there is smoke about the Lions getting Carter there, and obviously I'm following that really closely. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Agreed.
For sure. Ben, the information that you have here and that you've aggregated and worked so hard on is just so impressive. And it's a great resource. Where can people find your work? Where can people support your work? What's the best way for them to do that?
So, grindingthemocks.com is the kind of home of all my data and public data and charts. You can also follow Grinding Mocks on Twitter if you don't want to deal with my annoying takes about other sports that are not American football. So those are the two main places to find me. Like I said, I have some writing for Football Outsiders that I'm doing. Just have one more mock draft, and then I'll be done with the writing for this year. But I've done some writing kind of about which players are rising, which players are falling. That article just came out on Football Outsiders, focusing on Bijan Robinson as the biggest riser and CJ Stroud as the biggest faller relative to draft position right now. And then also I've been doing some really, I think, awesome partnership work with Kevin Cole, formerly of PFF and now of the Unexpected Points Substack and podcast, where I've been sharing data with him to kind of fuel. So I think is some really fun and really interesting and really important analytical work that he's doing. And we might have a little bit of our own draft stream this Thursday night. Not that we'll necessarily be competing too much with Eric and Thomas, but we'll kind of be doing our own thing using some of my data, and then also using some of the data that Eric's put together on his projections for the class this year from an analytical standpoint. I'm not sure we'll make it the whole night because I'll be really, really tired after doing data collection all day. And, Kevin has his things that are going on in his world as well. But we'll try to do something fun to kind of round out draft night. Otherwise, I'm probably just going to kick my feet up and kind of see how well my data does, because I'm always a little bit concerned. But every year it usually works out pretty well. But it doesn't mean that I don't sweat a little bit, hoping that my, how many guys can I get in the top 100? How many of my top 31 this year go in the top 31? Last year we had 30 of the top 32 players in a very chalky draft. I think in this year the draft will be way less chalky. I project it'll be closer to like 25 or 26 if I'm lucky. So should be fun. I'm excited for it all the same.
Awesome. It'll definitely be a great night. And yes, man, I hope that you enjoy a cold beer or whatever your vice is on Thursday night and celebrate the work you've done with all of this. Again, Grinding the Mocks, Ben Robinson on Twitter. You can find him at Grinding Mock is where the site is, and all of his links there. Ben, thanks so much for being on the show today. Thanks for chatting with us. And I'm sure we'll chat again soon before the draft.
Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ben.
Awesome. Great to have been there. Let me correct that. Oof. Got our faces all over the place there. Clearly, I don't know a lot about the Streamyard, but we're figuring that out. Awesome to have been on there. So interesting to just look at how the wisdom of crowds kind of directs our attention and helps us understand trends. Great stuff. He's got those great kind of time series graphs as well. So you can see last August, one person mock draft, whatever random player super high, and then everyone else caught up. It's really fascinating to see. So definitely check that out. Tej, should we do it? Should we pivot to the breaking news? I just tweeted this out. It might be a little sensational, but live reaction to the Aaron Rodgers trade. It's happened. It finally happened, despite the fact that we said, you know what, it's not going to happen until after the first round of the draft. No big deal. It has, in fact, happened. Let's talk about the terms. Let's talk about our reactions and some specific numbers using kind of an analytical approach to the draft chart and what we might think happen there. So, Tej, the trade, what are the details? What are your thoughts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I joked at the beginning that I literally texted you this morning, and I was like, the Aaron Rodgers trade won't happen until the day of the draft. And then, of course, it happens a couple hours later. And I think it had to happen because the Packers wanted to get that pick swap in there where they go from 13 to 15. The Jets come up from 15. Or sorry, the Jets go back to 15. Or there, and so the Packers gain a little bit of value, but also the second round pick that the Packers get, number 42 overall, was important to them, I'm sure, as well. And the Jets had the back-to-back second round picks there, so you can see how like they wanted to keep one of the second round picks, give up the other one. But the biggest thing about this trade is the condition on how much playing time Aaron Rodgers has. If he plays 65% of the Jets snaps next year, then the second round pick that is slated for 2024 becomes a first round pick for the Packers. And that's really big because if we work under the assumption that Aaron Rodgers will probably play 65% of the snaps next year, granted that he has stayed relatively healthy these past couple of years, and we haven't seen him, want to miss games for any particular reason. That extra first round pick that the Jets have to give up makes this trade pretty big for the Packers, given that they were able to get the second round pick this year and possibly a first round pick next year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it reveals a lot about the misperception of leverage there. I think a lot of people thought that Green Bay kind of held all the cards and said, or excuse me, that the Jets held all the cards because Rodgers was going to force a trade from Green Bay, and it was done all but in principle, yada, yada. This reveals that the Jets pretty badly wanted to get Aaron Rodgers in the building sooner rather than later, and giving up a lot here. I'm interested in this from a couple perspectives. The Jets pretty decent at defense last year. Had a good the overall perception is they had a good team. They had some good elements. They really struggled at the quarterback position. One might even say they were a quarterback away. They go get their guy. They really think that they're going to be able to kind of ascend to that next level. I'm interested because what we know about defenses regress, and so the Jets got a lot of good defense last year, and defenses just regress. I think that. It'll be interesting to see kind of how they balance that and how this offensive ceiling increase kind of gives their team floor a little bit higher, knowing that we should expect a little bit of defensive regression. Matt in the chat brings up the point I wanted to go to next. There are opportunities to there's a pretty big incentive here for for strategic sitting of Aaron Rodgers. Even if you look at the Jets schedule, when it comes out of, maybe there's a strategic week they could sit him and get him under that 65 threshold. Maybe if they're missing out of the playoff running, they sit him and let Wilson play and just deal with it to make sure they keep that pick. That's certainly something to keep an eye on down the stretch. I think that's really, really interesting just because the stakes on that are so high. That's going to be pick what? 50 something or 20 something is going to be the difference. That's going to be like 24 to 56 or something. That's going to be a huge change in draft pick value there if Rodgers gets over that 65% threshold. So if the Jets aren't in playoff contention, I certainly think that's something we'll have to look at and think about is, would it be advantageous to keep that first round pick?
For sure. And you bring up the point about the defense. The Jets started 5-2 last year with a collection of Joe Flacco, Zach Wilson, Mike White, a kind of revolving door of quarterbacks throughout the season. And that was off their defense and having Breece Hall kind of lead their running game. So you could see a situation where the defense doesn't regress as much as people think, and they're able to win some games even if Aaron Rodgers misses time, and they can kind of get that like sweet spot scenario. But I do think that the most likely outcome is that Aaron Rodgers plays the majority of the season. The Jets, the betting market, really likes them to make the playoffs, to compete for the AFC. So the Jets probably make the playoffs, and then we see the situation where the Jets give up, let's say, like the 24 overall pick next year. And so then when we look at the trade through that lens, we can use the Fitzgerald-Spielberger chart from Over the Cap to kind of add up draft value. So the Fitzgerald-Spielberger chart, for those who don't know, is really good because it uses a less steep draft curve than the Jimmy Johnson chart. And it works more on how these picks have actually performed rather than way back when Jimmy Johnson created this chart and how he necessarily overvalued some of the top picks of the draft and undervalued later picks. So if we use the Fitzgerald-Spielberger chart, we see that the Jets gave up a total of around 4,400 points according to the chart. We're number one overall is worth 3,000 points. The Jets in return got around 2,000 points. So the difference between those two is around 2,400 points on this draft chart. And that's roughly equivalent to number 3 overall. So with all those numbers aside, they essentially traded the number 3 overall worth of draft picks to get Aaron Rodgers once you go back and forth on all the picks that were swapped. And I think that's, pretty decent amount of draft capital to give up for someone at the stage in Aaron Rodgers' career. But again, based on the quarterback play last year, I see why they did it, because they needed to get an upgrade at that position to put themselves as true contenders in the AFC.
Yeah, looking at their betting markets, their win total is 9.5, but they all this is via DraftKings updated last Thursday, so it doesn't reflect the Aaron Rodgers trade, although I think the numbers had the Rodgers trade baked in because we kind of knew it was going to happen. Win total 9.5, just the over of minus 130. To make the playoffs, they're minus 130. To win the division, they are plus 250. I believe that's second. Most likely in the division, and plus 1,400 to win the Super Bowl, which is not as long odds as you'd think for given how they played last year. So certainly some positive momentum there. They get the quarterback that they want. The league gets its blockbuster trade this offseason right before the draft, and fortunately that happened at 5 or I guess 4 o'clock Eastern, not midnight Eastern, and made it a little bit easier for everyone. Before we move on from the Rodgers trade, you have pick 13 in the draft. You're willing to spend some capital. You're willing to spend a first next year. Tej, would you have, if you're the GM of the Jets, just dropped in right now, would you prefer to have pursued this Rodgers trade or to try and trade up in the draft for one of these quarterbacks?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because the Jets have drafted the most amount of quarterbacks since 2011 of any team in the league, and none of them have hit. And I think, if you take that many swings at the position, it's like hard to be it's easy to be a little cell shocked. Like I could see why that after Zach Wilson, after Sam Darnold, like the Jets owners and the Jets executives are tired of dipping into the draft. So I see why from their perspective, they would have done that. But if I was Joe Douglas, who I think is a really good GM, I still would have waited until draft day to make this trade. I would have wanted to see how the board fell, and if we as the Jets had a really high grade on Anthony Richardson and he was suddenly available at number 11 and we wanted to trade up for that, I think that should have been something considered. But the Jets came out and made it very clear that they were going to get Aaron Rodgers, and they even backed out of the Lamar sweepstakes early, and they said at like a press conference or an event that Rodgers was going to be a Jet. So they kind of tied their hands here where they had to end up making this trade before the draft.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that kind of goes full circle with the leverage conversation. Interesting. Yeah. Fun that we got a little bit of breaking news on the podcast, not a planned segment that we had. So glad we got to dive into that a little bit. Tej, we do have some more planned segments here. Where do you want to go next with what's on our list?
Yeah, let's do. I think this will be a lot of fun. We talked about this before, and there's so many mock drafts that are put out, and I read all of them because I'm a junkie, and Benjamin Robinson, aggregates all of them into one spot. But I like to hear a what would we do draft. I like to see like what other analysts would want to do, and I think that'd be something fun that we can do today, where we go through the top 16 picks since we have the back half of the hour here, and we alternate and we say that if we were the GM of the team that is on the clock, what would we do in those spots? Who would we select? Why would we select them? And what other options we consider? So Parker, we were drawing this up beforehand, and you ended up with the number 1 pick. So, I'm curious to hear who you would select at number 1 overall if you were the Panthers GM.
Yes. Okay. So you're tracking this for us, so we can mention our results afterwards and keep track of this.
Mm-hmm.
I think the point of this is to not have any hot takes, not do anything other than say we're both kind of analytically minded guys. Let's put pen to paper and kind of see what we would do in this situation. And so I am going to look at Carolina, and I'm going to say they're plus 165 to make the playoffs at all this year. They're plus 7,500 to win the Super Bowl. We've got to make a dent in those odds. You have to take your guy. If you've got the grade on Bryce Young, which I believe we do from what we've seen on the betting markets and leaks and everything, you have Andy Dalton there to ease him in. Now, say what you will about Andy Dalton's pro career, but I think he's actually been pretty solid and reliable in the role that he can do. And veteran guy who's going to help a guy get in the league, who's going to build him up for success and make an easy transition of power. I think this is a wonderful landing spot for Bryce Young, for Carolina to get their quarterback of the future. We're taking Bryce Young at pick 1-1.
That's great. I think that's who I would have taken there, and I'm glad TCU legend Andy Dalton got a shout out here as well. So
Nice guy.
With the Texans at number 2 overall, there's been a lot of speculation about a non-quarterback, like we talked about with Benjamin Robinson at the beginning of the show. But if I'm Nick Caserio and the Texans brass, I'm still going to go quarterback. I think being in this spot at number 2, you have to take advantage of this opportunity. You hope you're never in this spot again, especially if you find a really good quarterback on a rookie contract. And to me, that is CJ Stroud. I think Stroud is just so polished. The accuracy, the decision making is all there, and that's evident on his tape. And for any CJ Stroud doubters out there, like, you just have to go watch the Georgia game against the best defense in the country and what he was able to do on that night. So I would take Stroud number 2 overall, even though I think there are people who would try to take a non-quarterback and then maybe take a quarterback at 12 with the Texans' other pick. But I think you should just get your guy and shouldn't try to be a little stingy at quarterback.
We're doing getting the guy off the top of the there. I think that's a really important perspective to look at. I will say, I don't know that we said out loud, we're going to do the first 16 picks. Would love to hear from you in the comments about what you think about our picks. Because again, these are just opinions. They're not fact. And it's certainly a topic that is open for debate. Okay, so we're going to number 3, the Arizona Cardinals. Looking at the Cardinals, again, I'm thinking about this in terms of how far away are we from contending for a Super Bowl. The Cardinals, last time I checked, were plus 20,000 on DraftKings to be Super Bowl winners. Tej, you and I today, in an unrelated conversation, we're just talking about how the state of the roster is not great. They do have some pretty solid draft capital, 4 top 100 picks, opportunities to get some immediate contributors who could grow and develop and long-term kind of help you build the right environment to take that level up. I think that I'm tempted to trade this back and try and increase draft capital, but you have Kyler Murray, you have a lot of draft capital in top 100. You go get a couple of receivers. You're middle of the road in pass blocking last year, so it's not like there's glaring deficiencies on your offensive line. Fix the defense. You get a generational prospect. The defense for Arizona we were 20. I'm Arizona now. We were 20th in EPA per play, 23rd in dropback EPA, and 22nd, in rushing EPA. I think we got to take Jalen Carter and just fundamentally reshape the front of our defense, increase our pass rush ceiling, increase our ability to defend the rush, give us an anchor on defense to help us keep in games so that our quarterback, who we've signed and committed to, can lead us into the future with a little bit more balance. So going to go ahead and take Jalen Carter off the board at 3.
I love that. I think a lot of people consider Jalen Carter one of the best overall prospects in the draft. So I do like getting that kind of blue chip high end player there on defense to start that out. So there's a question by William Jones here. Cards want out of the pick. Can you talk about the surplus value or lack thereof of how these factors are going into trading that pick, Parker?
Yeah, so I think when you're thinking about trading it, it's a couple of things. One, that trading up, there's kind of like the loser's curse there, and that it might not be a positive EV move generally. Tej, I hope that while I'm talking about this, you're pulling up the Fitz Spielberger chart so that we can say those exact numbers. But I think that if you're trading down at number 3 for Arizona, you're saying, hey, we're really far away from the Super Bowl and we have multiple spots that we need to fill. Let's get a little bit more draft capital. Let's build up our foundation and let's get more players, more potential hits that can be cornerstone pieces on our roster and help us long-term, instead of putting all of our eggs in one basket that if it doesn't pan out, we're not going to, we're going to be no better off and we're just going to have wasted draft capital there. So I think trading down is less about surplus value and more about diversification of your portfolio, as it were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I like the way that you laid that out a lot. I think, something that's interesting and talked about a lot, and like the Fitzgerald Spielberger chart would back this up, is the rookie wage scale, how much each player gets paid based on where they're slotted, is steeper than most analytical draft value charts, right? So that's why, when we talk about the loser's curse, and if you're not taking a quarterback in the top 5, it's less surplus value, quote unquote, than taking a non-quarterback at like number 10 overall. That's what this kind of comes down to, is it's because you have to pay them more, and you usually get some more production, but on the aggregate, on the average, it's less production than the drop off in rookie wage scale. So that's why the Cardinals probably want to trade out of this pick. But when you can get a player of Jalen Carter's caliber, and we know that these teams like to really do that, and like to get players like that in their building, like I think that's sometimes what you want to do there. So thanks for the question on that.
Yeah, great
Going
question.
on to the number 4 overall pick. So I think this is a great scenario for the Colts to be in, where Bryce Young goes 1, CJ Stroud goes 2, and then a non-quarterback like Jalen Carter goes number 3. The Colts have made it very clear that they're probably going to take a quarterback of some sort. You have Jim Irsay kind of treating out 4 images of the 4 quarterbacks in this draft this year, which might be the ultimate smokescreen, but I think he wants a quarterback. And as the Colts GM, I'll appease my boss, and I will take Florida's Anthony Richardson here. I think with what Shane Steichen was able to do with Jalen Hurts last year at the Eagles, taking Anthony Richardson in this spot and the design run game and some of the concepts that you can draw up with as athletic of a rusher as him could be really, really exciting. And we can also see that passing game develop as well. So Anthony Richardson would be my pick at number 4 overall.
That is spicy, and that changes a lot of what's going on later in my draft. So I like that. We're gonna make some changes on the fly. Again, you got to go with upside. We've said the phrase "get your guy," and I think that's an analytical phrase. If you believe that you have a high grade on a quarterback that can change your franchise, and you're in the position to take him, the surplus value there from taking him on a rookie contract is so high. You just have to go ahead and do it. So I like it. AR goes to the Colts there after months of them being mocked to take Levis and linked to Levis. Interesting. All right. Well, I am going to go number 5 with the Seahawks. And I think that as the Seahawks, we wanted Jalen Carter. We need defensive linemen, and, hoping that maybe the off-field rumors would bring his draft stack down enough that he would be there till number 5 and could get him in our building. But with that not happening, going to go ahead and take the other kind of disruptive high ceiling guy in the middle, on the defensive line. We're going to take Tyree Wilson from Texas Tech at number 5. We're content to get a foundational piece at edge there, and content to take a defensive lineman who's going to raise the ceiling of our defense super high at a key position. Again, we'll cite Timo Riesk's research talking about, the important positions in the draft, kind of how to win, and defensive linemen, particularly the edge position, are a key position to target for kind of your long-term and short-term. He can come in immediately and contribute. He'll be on a rookie contract to give us a lot of value.
That's a great pick. I think based on the draft that the Seahawks had last year, getting in another edge rusher in there to complement all the secondary pieces they were able to pick up is really good. And Tyree Wilson just kind of fits their mold of edge rushers. So I could definitely see that with that. So yeah, we have 3 of the quarterbacks off the board, and we have 2 of the defensive players in Jalen Carter and Tyree Wilson.
Before you go to number 6, have you seen the picture? I need to tweet this out so that everyone can see this, of Tyree Wilson next to the rest of Texas Tech's defensive line from last year. It's like in August or something. It's after practice, and it looks like the Mark Ingram, Derrick Henry photo, where it's just like, oh, this guy's playing an entirely different sport. The physical tools from Tyree Wilson are just absolutely absurd. I'm shocked that he would be as far as 5. He's a player. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah, no, I think the best version of that is Sean Oakman when Baylor was playing Michigan State in the bowl game years ago. I think the way that he was standing next to all his teammates was also great. But the Derrick Henry, Mark Ingram one's amazing too.
Yeah. All right, Tej, you've got we set this up well. We both got to draft our own team, so you've got your Lions, the first of 2 picks at 6.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm with the Lions at 6. I think that they would be pretty pleased with the way the board has fallen. I would be in between Will Anderson and Devin Witherspoon, between the edge and the corner here. And I think based on the offseason signings that the Lions made, getting multiple corners into the building and needing just one more pass rusher to complement Aiden Hutchinson, I think that they go Will Anderson from Alabama here. There's been some concerns with Will Anderson not having as high of a ceiling as Tyree Wilson, but I think just the floor that he gives you and the run stopping ability, which the Lions really struggled at, coupled with being an elite pass rusher, can really help this Lions defense, and they really need help at this spot. So I like taking Will Anderson at number 6.
Yeah, that's a smart move. And again, he falls a little bit more than I think people think he would there. And yeah, as William Jones, credit for a second very insightful, very engaging comment there. Hutch and Will Anderson would make a lot of difference at a field. It'd be very hard to defend, for sure. We go now to the Raiders at 7. And I will say this is the one that perplexed me the most. I wanted to trade this down to the Titans, depending on the quarterback situation. But again, I am the Titans in this draft later on. And so I see that Levis is still there. And I see a couple teams that have said they're not going to take a quarterback. The Falcons, the Bears, the Eagles aren't going to take a quarterback. Levis might still be there at 11. I'm not sure it's worth the draft capital to go up and get him at this point. So we're not going to trade. What I'm going to do is say for Las Vegas, there are no trade offers. They're plus 350 to win the division. They've got Jimmy G coming in who could potentially, give their offense a very, very a level of consistency they haven't seen. Let's bolster the defense. They were 31st in dropback EPA in 2022. Only better than the Bears, which is not a good defensive metric for last season. And they were 29th in coverage grade at PFF. Let's bolster that. Let's take Devin Witherspoon, who I'm sure you've been seeing the same things. A lot of people said internally that he's rising up boards pretty fast. So as the Raiders, I'm very happy to get my lockdown corner in Devin Witherspoon at number 7 and help us, get out of that bottom third of defensive pass defense from last year.
Yeah, that's a really good fit. I think Witherspoon's a fantastic prospect. Eric and Thomas talked about him and gave him a lot of praise on the quarterback show that was on here. So I like that a lot. And the Raiders really need help at corner. I think that's been a very popular mock, and it's like something that makes a lot of sense as well. So that's a good pick there. And so now I'm sitting there at number 8 for the Falcons, and with Witherspoon off the board and with the other pass rushers between Tyree Wilson, Will Anderson, Jalen Carter off the board as well. If I was the Falcons, I would be looking to trade back here, but if there were no suitors that really wanted to come up, I would take Christian Gonzalez, the corner from Oregon, and I think many people's second highest rated corner to be across from AJ Terrell. And I think you can, if they were to take Christian Gonzalez or some other corner here, I think you can start to see how their secondary gets rounded out. They signed Jesse Bates to a big contract. This offseason, they have AJ Terrell, who is one of the best young corners in the league. And then on top of that, you take a flyer on Jeff Okudah, and then you have Christian Gonzalez. So those are all defensive backs that are capable of playing at high NFL levels. And I think that if you start to take more chances at the corner room, like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers did when they built their Super Bowl winning roster, and the Falcons saw that firsthand being in the division, that's how you start to get towards like having a better pass defense. And they're making their way towards that.
Yeah, a kind of an incremental upgrade as well there as they've kind of bolstered that position and look to increase it. I think that jives well with the kind of the spirit of the next pick that I'm going to go for. The Bears, right? The Bears here at number 9 have a lot of needs, have a lot of potential. Made a good trade with Carolina to get some more draft capital to get a wide receiver that might be able to help them address a need, but they do have some holes on the offensive line. They're middle of the pack in run blocking last year. Fields was under pressure 45.7% of the time, which was the most of any starter, any regular starter, only behind Skylar Thompson of the Dolphins. And we saw how bad that got. I think that they're going to go ahead and take Peterskoronski from from Northwestern. Excuse me. He is a tackle who there are some concerns about his measurements and that he might shift to guard in the long run at the league. I think this is great because, the Bears are not competing for a Super Bowl this year. I don't think that's breaking any news. They're sitting at, let me get that exact number. Excuse me. The Bears are sitting at plus 5,000 for a Super Bowl. We're not going to make a dent in that for this season, right? But what we can do by drafting Skoronski is draft a guy who's versatile, put him at tackle, let him see if he pans out at tackle. If he needs to move to guard, then next year I know I have guard shored up and I can draft a tackle. You get a guy that can play multiple positions, a really good talent who knows the game well and can elevate the quality of your offensive line room. And if he pans out at tackle, all the better. So we're going to take the versatile lineman Skoronski there at number 9 for the Bears. Again, give Justin Fields a little bit of breathing room and get us a guy who helps fill a hole.
Yeah, for sure. I can definitely see that, and keeping Skoronski in the same state of Illinois would make a lot of sense for the Bears there. So I like that a lot. Sitting at number 10 overall with the Eagles. If I was Howie Roseman, and knowing what Howie Roseman usually likes to draft, but even just what I would do in this situation is I would take Georgia edge Nolan Smith at number 10 here. I think that the Eagles pass rushers, or the Eagles showed last year that they can get pass rush through just having a ton of guys that they can kind of rotate through, and like Nolan Smith kind of bolsters that with them losing some of that depth in free agency. And I think fantastic athlete can pair well with what they already have on their defensive line. And even if I think that the Eagles are probably going to trade out of this spot if Carter and Witherspoon are gone, but I think if they're just sticking at this spot, they can really take a strong pass rusher.
I was so prepared for that to be Levis. I don't know if this is the time to have the conversation, but it would be smart to draft. But they did just pay Hurts so much, so I guess that conversation was a couple weeks stale at this point. We're going to go to the Titans at 11. My Titans. Will Levis is on the board there. They do need a quarterback. I'm still going to zig though, because I don't know if the Titans believe Will Levis is their quarterback of the future. And I think that they had a wide receiver room that was comprised of just not guys you wanted playing full-time minutes for you. They need wide receivers there to surround Tannehill, to give them even a fighting chance at the division, an immediate impact to a long-term help, be opposite Treylon Burks, give you something a little bit different in the passing game to kind of give you some levels and reliable options. So we're going to go Jackson Smith-Njigba for the Titans there at 11. They're happy he fell. And just again, the defense has been good. The offense has had some injury issues and some depth issues at wide receiver. They can bring in a guy who can space things out, that takes pressure off the offensive line. Every rising tide lifts all ships there with JSN.
Yeah, that's great. I think he should be the first receiver taken off the board. So I'm glad that that's what happened here. And now I'm here at 12 with the Texans, and I guess you could see the scenario now where they do take their favorite defensive player at number 2 and then take Will Levis at 12 if the draft were to fall this way. But again, I don't think you want to get risky when it comes to the quarterback. So, I think that it's fine that CJ Stroud was taken with the first of the Texans pick. And now the Texans sit at this really interesting situation, because I would have loved JSN in this spot, but I get why you took him. So, I'm looking to kind of see where else the Texans could go in this spot. And I think that going somewhere along the defensive line would be the right thing to do. And I really like Miles Murphy, especially like his arm length. So, I think that the Texans could add to their pass rush in this spot, knowing that they want a pass rusher. So I would take Miles Murphy from Clemson in this spot. It might be a little bit earlier than I think people are expecting him to go, but based on the way the board fell, I think that he could fit at number 12.
Nice. I like it. The defender goes off. Yeah, we've still got a couple guys up there that I thought would get drafted a little bit higher, but just the way things have shaken out, they're not. We come to the Packers at their 13 now. So they and the Jets switch, which actually I think makes my Jets pick a little bit bigger. Before the trade here, I was going to go with Quentin Johnston for the Packers at 15. They have good pass blocking. You need a dude at wide receiver to kind of ease Love in and give him the opportunity to see if he's the guy. You've invested in him. Quentin Johnston, huge yards after catch player, very explosive. And he does have a little bit of a hands issue that I think is pretty correctable with a little bit of coaching. And so even though they've traded up here and it does feel like a little bit more of a reach, I am going to go with Quentin Johnston instead of Will Levis. I don't think it makes sense to take another first round quarterback without, with your succession plan of Jordan Love happening here. I think I'd rather take a flyer on one of the guys in the later rounds and not pay the capital for Levis. Instead, give an opportunity to Jordan Love to have a playmaker at the wide receiver position that can help them, succeed right now and fill some of those holes. So we're going to go QJ at 13 for the Packers.
Yeah, that's great. I think having Christian Watson and Quentin Johnston, very similar, where they're just good route runners, insane after the catch ability. You're always going to be a little worried about their hands, but I think that's something that's fixable. That kind of variates a lot year to year. So I really like that pick there as well. And then now I'm Bill Belichick. This is a cool moment for me as someone who respects him a lot. So putting myself in his shoes, really big shoes to fill here. And I think the Patriots have to go tackle, not even based on the way that the board has fallen, just in general. And the who I see as the best tackle available right now is Paris Johnson Jr. from Ohio State. So I will take him at this spot and just get that offensive line solidified to make a push this year, now that we have a better offensive coordinator and hopefully Mac Jones can bounce back to what we saw from him his rookie year.
Interesting. There is a run on tackles here. I had tackle penciled in for the Jets. So by trading down from 13 to 15, we do lose out on Paris Johnson. But I'll tell you what, I think my pick at 13 anyway was Broderick Jones from Georgia. I like his development. I like his ceiling. Comes in, to an experienced quarterback who might be a little bit better at avoiding, dealing with pressure. So gives him a little bit of a longer leash to kind of get in and build up our offensive line. So going to go with Broderick Jones and the Georgia pedigree there for the Jets at 15 for my last pick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I like that a lot. I think getting the tackles there is good. And then, the last pick that we have today is we near the 57-minute mark. I think we can take a question or two before the hour wraps up. But if I was the Commanders in this spot, I have Jacoby Brissett. I will try out Sam Howell at some point, but you never can take too many shots at the quarterback position. And I feel like Will Levis has to go here. Oh, sorry, I cut out for a second there.
No, you're good. I was laughing laughing because it's inevitable. They've got to do it. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with this totally.
So Commanders, new owner, wants someone exciting and takes Will Levis at number 16. So now you have a pretty packed quarterback room, but I think Jacoby Brissett will be a good player to learn from. You can still try out Sam Howell, and then based on Sam Howell versus Will Levis, you can decide on your future there. So I don't want to see Will Levis keep sliding down the board and sitting in the green room where he was drinking his mayo coffee, I think it is, or eating bananas with the peel on. It was getting a little awkward, so I decided to take him off the board there and put him at 16.
I have no comment about the mayo coffee, but I do like the way that our draft board has gone down. Tej, we should get a screenshot of our mock draft and tweet that out so that we can discuss it further on Twitter. So fun exercise again, just to talk about the thought process. Always a big fan of putting pen on paper and saying, if other people are making mock drafts and I think they might not get what encompass everything that I want, I can put pen to paper and kind of make my own and do the analytical exercise of actually trying to assign these teams and thinking about how these teams will approach the draft. Let's look through a couple of these questions here and get them before we get off the air. Scrolling through. Doug Analytics says, imagine we see more tight ends than wide receivers in round one. Not totally impossible. It's not, I think, especially when you look at kind of the turn and who needs what in the last part of the draft. After JSN and Quentin Johnston, I think the wide receiver talent is certainly more well suited to a second option than kind of a premier number one wide receiver. And so you could see some of these teams wanting to take a tight end. The issue with tight end is, as we know, they take a couple years to develop. And so that's a long-term investment. And so that's where I see that maybe the shine in the first round of a tight end falls off a little bit, just because some of those guys aren't going to be immediate impact players. Generally it's going to be year 2, even into year 3 before they kind of start seriously contributing on the field. So, could happen, but if I had to make a choice or say something committal here, I'd say probably won't happen, just because the immediate upside is not there. What do you think, Tej?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it would be really interesting if this happened. We know this tight end class is talked about really highly relative to other tight end classes, and this wide receiver class is talked about relatively lowly or lesser. So I could see this happening, but I do think that a lot of teams will wait and take a lot of tight ends on day 2 in the second and third rounds, because there's just so many of them in this year's draft, and very highly athletic ones too, like we talked about earlier. So I think that's what will happen, but it would be really intriguing if more tight ends went than wide receivers in the first.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, Doug. Analytics. Colin Dunphy asks, if the draft was hypothetically repeated by the league 10 times, how similar would we expect the results to be to each other? That is a great question. What do you think, Tej?
This is more of your wheelhouse with all the work that you've done, but my very basic answer, without having a PhD in econometrics, is I think very different. I think that based on just what we see from kind of the way that boards fall in general, or just like the way that your decisions can be swayed based on very, very basic things. I think if it were simulated 10 times, there's just so much variance that can happen. There's such a wide range of outcomes stemming from that number 2 pick with the Texans, where they could make 4 different decisions and the whole rest of the draft goes differently. So because of the butterfly effect, I think like we would almost rarely get identical results in the top 10 or even in the whole draft.
Yeah, great answer. I think that's close to my thinking there is you say butterfly effect. I say history is path dependent and non-ergodic, right? I can't change one pick and have every other pick be the same. The paths are going to be so different. That being said, I think the top 5 or 6 teams kind of generally know what they want to do and what they're going to do and have pretty rigid plans. So I think we'd actually see the most variation where we see the difference between, for instance, Ben Robinson's grinding the mocks and reality is, after about pick 20, it's a little bit of buckshot there, right? Like we don't really know what's going to happen. Prediction accuracy gets way worse. And so I think we'd see just a ton of variation in the later rounds. I think the first, the top 15 could look relatively similar. Because even if a team was going to go back with hindsight, right? Even if they repeated the league, knowing what everyone else did, the strategic maneuverability is going to be really, really hard to exploit. So I think we'd see a lot of similarity at the top half, and in the later, the later half of the first round, we'd see a lot of variation. Even the 7th round, I mean, yeah, could be all over the place. I think you get into a fun conversation about, well, do they know what happened in the last draft? Because maybe there's someone that's not on my draft board that someone else drafted that I think, oh, maybe I actually want him. And so it gets very interesting later on, but I think we could see wildly varying outcomes there.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to,
oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I think it goes back to, we see so many quotes during draft season about GM saying, we only have X amount of first round grades this year. We only have 15 amount of first round grades on players. And so that's where I think the variation would come, like you mentioned, is maybe they all have a pretty similar amount of first round grades on players and similar players getting those first round grades. But once you move out of that, once you move past the top 15 or 16 of the draft, then they might have these wild variations in grading players. And that's when you get like a Cole Strange pick, like the Patriots had last year, where the Rams were doing a press conference live during that pick and mentioned that they thought they were going to be able to get them in the 3rd round. And he ended up going in the 1st round.
Yeah, that is wild. And yeah, definitely get some variation here and there in that. I think we got one more question from who I will call the comment MVP of this podcast, William Jones, who I think I called William James earlier. Excuse me, William Jones, who's asking a third very good, very insightful comment here. As this is an analytics pod, thank you. We do consider ourselves that. Curious where Bijan Robinson, running back out of Texas, will land. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to hear from both of us is that taking a first-round running back is just not that good of an idea. Not because they're not going to be a good player, right? If Bijan Robinson got drafted by the Texans tomorrow, or Thursday rather, Tej, he would be a great running back. I have no doubt on that. He would put up good numbers, and he might even help the Texans win in certain situations. But what they're going to give up in opportunity cost, the player they couldn't draft to get Bijan Robinson, one, first order, and two, the longer term kind of second contract where they're going to have to do something, either overpay him or, be at the beginning, start at the beginning all over again, plus the injury risk there. What they have to give up in terms of team building and capital to get him is just not a good decision. I think is that a succinct way to say kind of our general position about why I wouldn't draft a running back super early?
No, I mean, that's a great way to put it. I think the problem with the league is that it's not necessarily a problem. It's just how it's designed. It's a finite resource league at the end of the day, right? Like, we as analytics people, we don't mean to completely devalue running backs. We just want, a reallocation of resources, and that just happens to make sure that, or mean that running backs are getting drafted less high up on boards. That means that they're getting less contracts. And that's what's kind of like sad about the whole situation, is because you only have so much salary cap and so many draft picks, you have to dedicate resources elsewhere. And it comes at the expense of less premium positions like running backs. And so that's why Bijan Robinson didn't end up going in our top 16 here in the draft. I do think that he should get drafted around where we ended off, because he's a really good prospect. The value of a 3-down running back is something that is more rare these days in the league, and his receiving ability, I think, allows him to maybe play in the slot like 30% of the times, while most running backs aren't able to do that. So if we were to continue and to finish out the first round, I could have seen Bijan Robinson going somewhere in the early 20s or maybe even mid 20s, but just because we didn't do all those picks, he ended up not getting drafted in our draft.
Yeah, I think that just kind of situationally, I could very much see a world where the Dallas Cowboys want him to fall to 26, take the Texas running back. That might have more to do with kind of the off-field stuff than the marketing, if you will, than maybe the player. I think it would be hard to see the Eagles at 30 passing him up. And that might be defensible because they have another first-round draft pick, right? And so they are able to kind of, they have that value they've created through trades. And they have a ton of young talent. Robinson could come in and immediately lift their offense up, give their rushing threat, yet another dimension consistently, like you mentioned. So I would be surprised if he made it out of the first round. Not to say it's necessarily a bad decision. I just think it's a tough decision to make, and doesn't work out more often than it does, I think, is how I would say that in terms of what you sacrifice and team building. You think about the Cowboys specifically. I don't remember the exact number, but they drafting Ezekiel Elliott so high, what you give up to get a running back at 4 is just absurd in terms of on-field value. So I would generally stay away. I think we generally stay away, but I think I could see a couple teams deciding that the calculation was worth it, even as we know there are some limitations there. Yeah, I don't see any more questions. Did I miss any that you had, Tej?
No, that was great. Yeah, I really appreciate everyone commenting and asking questions. That was a lot of fun to do this, and this was a jam-packed show here where we talked to Benjamin Robinson, we talked to the Rodgers trade, and we were able to draft in the top 16 of the draft as a what would we do type deal, and then also answer some questions. So I'm really glad we got to do this today.
Yeah, this was really fun. Thanks to Eric and Thomas for letting us hop on. All of us at Sumer are super busy this week, whether it's working on, getting our ducks in a row for our client tools for the draft, influencing who's going to be drafted, or Tej, you and I have been working a lot of graphics and visuals for the draft show, which will be live Thursday. You have Eric Eager and Thomas Dimitrov live, just reacting and explaining and talking about the process. I don't know that you're going to have another draft show with a former GM with the pedigree of Thomas Dimitrov being able to give his insight on the draft. So certainly a resource that you should have on one of your screens on Thursday night. Plus, I'm a little biased, but I think some of the visuals are, as the kids say, fire. And so I think it'll be a really good overall podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the channel at Sumer Sports on almost every platform you can imagine. Twitter as well. Tej has been tweeting out some great graphs, and we got some draft capital graphs that are gonna come out this week as well. A couple other things, some great content there. Articles on sumersports.com/the zone all week, looking at an analytical approach about how real people who have real analytics backgrounds, who work with teams and have worked with teams, think about issues of team building and roster construction, all sorts of great stuff. So make sure you check that out. In the meantime, we will be back on Thursday night for the draft show. Make sure you're tuned in. And Tej, thanks for chatting today.
Of course, it's always a great time.